So if you don't know, this is the camera control button on the right side of your iPhone. It is kind of in a weird spot because ideally it should have been lower so that it's easier to use in landscape. But of course, people also shoot in portrait, so Apple had to push it up. But it should have been higher for portraits, so it's in a weird spot that it's not easy to use in either orientation. But what's important is that if you click it once, even if you're on the lock screen or the home screen, it will open the camera app. And if your screen is completely turned off, you can double click and that will also open the camera app. And once you are inside the camera app, you can click it once to take a photo. You can click it and hold it to start recording a video, and once you let go, the video will stop. And yes, you can double click if you're on the home screen or the lock screen, or triple click if your screen's completely turned off, and it will open the camera and take a photo. Although there is a little bit of delay between the camera opening and the photo being taken, but it is possible. Now, because this is also a capacitive button, which means it can sense pressure, if you kind of half press it, so you apply a little bit of pressure, you will feel a haptic click from the phone, and that will bring up some sort of slider. However, if you double half press, that will bring up a bunch of things. I'm going to call them tools, and we're going to talk about them right now. So let's start with the one all the way to the left. To get to that one, you can just swipe your finger across the button. You don't have to tap or press anything. And once you're there, you can half press to select it. And that will bring up a slider again. And you can see it says EV, which stands for exposure value. And basically, in simple words, this just controls how bright or dark your image gets. So the higher this value is, the brighter your image will be, and the lower this value is, the darker your image will get. Let's look at the next one. So again, to go to the tools, you can double half press and then swipe to the right and then half press again to select it. And again, that brings up another slider. And you can see it's by default, it's set to f2.8. Now the letter F stands for f-stop or aperture. And on an actual real camera, this controls mainly two things. One, the amount of light that enters through the lens, and two, the amount of background blur you get. And this is done through a physical, actual moving aperture. So the wider it gets, the more light enters through the lens and the blurrier the background gets. And the smaller it gets, the less light enters through the lens and the sharper your background gets, the more everything will be in focus. However, of course, on your iPhone, there are no moving parts, so this is done through software. But in this case, changing the F value will not change how bright or dark your image gets. It will only change how blurry or in focus your background is. So if I choose f1.4, which is the lowest you can go on this phone, you can see how blurry the background gets. And to be honest, this looks a little too artificial, right? You can really see the imperfections and the cutout of the subject. So for this slider, I would not recommend you to go to its extreme low end. Try to stay away from f1.4 as much as you can. Now, if you go all the way to the other end, all the way to f16 and take a photo, technically, based on how actual cameras work, everything should be in focus, or most of the background. But you can see here, the background still looks blurry. Although the imperfections are gone, you no longer see that very noticeable cutout. And actually using a higher aperture value on this phone looks basically exactly the same as not even using the f-stop function. So if you just take a normal photo, it looks pretty much exactly the same. So honestly, I probably wouldn't use this f-stop value anytime. If you just want the best looking background blur on your iPhone, just take a normal photo. Okay, let's talk about the next tool. So this one is called Zoom, and this one's pretty self-explanatory. It just lets you zoom in and out. The next tool is called Cameras, and this one's, again, very similar to the zoom slider. The only difference is that it doesn't let you stop anywhere in the zoom range, so you can only select 0.5, 1x, 2x, and 5x. Now, just before I tell you about the next one, let me quickly tell you about Squarespace. Hands down, one of the best website building platforms out there. The thing I love about it is how easy it's to use. You can literally right now go to your search bar and type squarespace.com/Spixel and just sign up for a free 14-day trial. You don't even need your credit card. And then just pick one of the many beautiful website templates, drag and drop your images, type your text, and connect your domain. In fact, you can get that from Squarespace as well. I recently got one from them, and my other domain is also managed by them. So I trust them. That's why I'm telling you about them. So check out the link below. I'm sure you're gonna like it. And if you do, you'll get 10% off your first purchase. You have nothing to lose, honestly. But then you have something called Styles and something called Tone. These two, I think, are kind of important and also kind of confusing to understand. So if you have tried using the Styles tool, you may have noticed that the slider lets you choose a bunch of different things, but it's kind of confusing what they are because they seem to be changing the color, but you may not be sure exactly what's going on. So what we're going to do is that instead of using them on this small slider with the camera control button, we're going to actually open them completely in the camera UI. So if you just swipe up anywhere and then click on the small square, that's the photographic styles. And the first thing you will notice is that there's this D-pad, this box over here with a bunch of dots on it and a circle in the middle, which you can place anywhere, which seems to affect the way your image looks. But here's the most important thing you need to know. So if you move up and down along the y-axis, you can see the tone values changing all the way at the top if you notice. And this is basically changing how dark or bright your shadows get. And if you move left or right across the x-axis, you will notice that this is changing the colors in your image. To me, it seems like it's changing the saturation specifically. So if you're all the way in the bottom left corner, your shadows will be super dark and there will be barely any color in your photo. There will still be some, but barely. And if you're all the way in the top right corner, your shadows are going to look bright and basically everything will look bright. And you'll also have nice and rich saturated colors, maybe a little too much. So generally for most photos, you don't want to go anywhere in the extreme corners. You want to stay somewhere on the middle unless you're trying to achieve a certain effect that only works if you are in those extreme corners. So feel free to play with this, see what you like, what you don't. And don't worry, you can reset all the settings. There's a reset button all the way at the top. If you hit that, everything will go back to default. Now, all the styles to the right are the ones that change your undertones. In other words, your skin tones. And the ones to the left are more of your typical standard stylistic filters that kind of impact the overall mood of your photo. Now, the other slider at the very bottom changes your palette value at the top. And from what I can understand, it seems like it's changing the intensity of that particular filter you're trying to use. The last one is called tone. And this is probably the most important one because it seems like it's controlling the amount of Apple's post-processing that gets applied to your image. Kind of. When you move the slider, you will notice that it just seems to be changing how bright or dark your shadows get. Now, the reason why this is very important because typically iPhones are known to really raise their shadows when you take a photo. So it kind of just makes all the bright parts of the image and the dark parts kind of the same. So your image kind of ends up looking flat, right? It doesn't have any depth. However, with the slider, you can change that. You can dial it back down. So you can add a little bit more shadows. You can make them darker. So it starts to look more like real life. That's nice. And that pretty much wraps up all the tools that are inside the camera control button. There are a few other things that I'll quickly tell you. So if you go to settings, cameras, you will see there's an option that says photo styles. And here you can choose one of those styles that change the way your skin tones look and adjust them a little bit and then save that, and that will be your default in the camera app. You can also reset if you want to go back to how it originally was. And then if you tap on camera control, you can change the app that the camera control button opens. So it doesn't have to be the camera app. And you can also change it to open the camera with a double click rather than a single click, which might actually be important because I have found myself accidentally opening the camera while just using the phone. Especially if you are a lefty, you might find yourself accidentally pressing the camera control button and opening your camera. So this is something you might want to do. Just change it to double click. And lastly, if you're going to use photographic styles and you just want them to automatically get applied to all the photos you're going to take in the future, one thing you might want to do is go to settings and then go to preserve settings and toggle on photographic styles. This will basically just remember your setting for photographic styles. So it won't automatically reset every time you open the camera app. And one more thing you want to know is that if you do end up taking a photographic style photo, the good thing about it is that it's not destructive, meaning if you go to your Photos app, you open the photo and you edit it, you can change the photographic style later. So it's not like burnt into your photo. You can always change it to a different one, change the intensity, the colors, everything. So that's really nice. That's pretty much everything I think you should know about this camera control button because it's on your phone, you've paid for it. So why not know everything about it, right? And overall, although I don't think this is a super useful button, I do think in the future, Apple is going to, improve it, maybe change the placement of it, improve that, maybe improve the functionality, add more features. So I think it's going to improve over time. Right now, it may not be the best.